I thought I was building an empire in the Philippines. An empire might be somewhat of an exaggeration, but for me, I felt like I was on top of the world when I moved there for an early retirement when I was only 54 years old. I had slightly over $1 million. It was invested for an income, which was an amazing income for the Philippines. It was my plan to go there and just live the retired life. But after I was there for only 3 months, I was getting bored and I was in need of a project to keep me occupied. I'd been going to the Philippines for as long as I could remember. I tried to get there every single year for the past 25 years before my retirement, and I felt like I knew everything that I needed to know about the country. I hadn't yet found someone who I wanted to be serious with, but it wasn't without trying. I knew the perfect woman would be out there. It was just a question of being patient and waiting for the right moment. Throughout all my vacations to the Philippines, I'd been all over the country. Every time I went back, I would spend time in Manila and go somewhere that I'd never been before. I developed some favourite places over the years. As much as I loved everything about the Philippines and all the places I went to, there was nowhere quite like Manila. And that's where I planned to spend my retirement, with occasional visits to other places. I was from a very small town back in the States, and ever since I could leave home and start my own life, I was drawn to big cities. I spent a lot of my working life in New York. Although it wasn't really my favourite city, it was purely a work-related thing. I preferred other cities in the country, but if I was able to make good money, I was prepared to live wherever I needed to. I think that's why I loved Manila so much, because I loved everything about the big city feel it gave you. It came with negatives that all big cities have. Bad traffic, hectic feelings, feeling like you're stressed all the time. But I loved the feeling of always being on it, as opposed to being relaxed and thinking, what am I going to do next? 3 months of living in Manila, I was already looking for something to do. The problem was, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I never guessed I would meet someone so soon, though, after arriving in the Philippines. I joined a dating site, and I was always open to going on casual dates, and I'd been on a lot throughout the whole 3 months that I'd been there, but they never really amounted to anything. But when I was on a date with this woman, I felt a connection. She worked in a call center, answering customer service related inquiries from people back in the States. It was a reasonable job, and it didn't pay her a lot of money though, and she had to work US hours. If you've ever called a customer service hotline in the States, lots of them will have people just like her working in the Philippines, and these are the sort of people you're going to be speaking to. She was a great person. She seemed to be driven, and she had lots of ambitions, just like I had. She was 22, and that was considerably younger than I was, but I wasn't hesitant as much as I thought I would have been. I used to just go on dates with people who were over 30, but the problem with that was, especially in the Philippines, every single woman I met who I was casually dating with, over the age of 28, every single one of them already seemed to have kids. I'd never met a woman in the Philippines, at least one that I was interested in, and one who was interested in me, who didn't have kids. So while I was looking for someone who was probably at least 10 years older than this woman was, I thought, well, let's have a fresh start together, because she didn't have kids. Therefore, no commitments, and I thought to myself that it's probably the best thing for me to do. When I called my son and told him that I met someone and she's actually younger than you, I could hear him sigh as if to say, here we go. But I didn't care, and life was great. I was living in BGC. She was living a long way away in Quezon City. On a good day, it would take almost an hour for her to get to me and for me to get to her. That's why I guess we rushed into things and we started to move in with each other not that long after. We didn't rush things too quickly though, like you hear in some stories that some guys do. She wasn't living with me within 2 weeks. But after dating for 3 months, that's when we decided to take things further. The place where she worked wasn't that close to where she lived either. She used to go on a jeepney every day to get to and from work, and I often asked her why she chose to live where she did. Something about her friends being close by, and because she wasn't from Manila, she felt more comfortable living close to people she knew and trusted. That made sense. It would have been about the same time for her to get to work from my place in BGC. So after 3 months, we decided it was the next best step for her to move in. This was back in 2012, and I'm happily retired, and now I've got a girlfriend. I'm happy to have something to occupy me, but I'm still looking for things to do all the time. I think our relationship went very well, and after she'd lived with me for about 6 months, I was happy to take things even further, and we got married. It was when we were married that she stopped working. It only felt right because the amount of money she earned didn't really contribute much to our marriage based on what I was bringing in from my retirement income. But because she was a hard worker and she worked a respectable job, because I was looking to do something in the Philippines to keep me occupied in terms of business, we thought it would be good if we could do things together. We didn't rush. We took things as they came and started to look into different things. Where I was from in the States, although I didn't live there after I left home, even though it was a small town, and even though I had just over $1 million, just to go and buy a house, one house, all I would have been able to do was do that. Okay, there are other parts of the country that are cheaper, but it didn't seem right that you could have over $1 million and that wasn't enough for you to buy a chunk of your own country. I get you need billions and billions in order to do that, but in the Philippines it felt like $1 million was enough to actually get a slice of it. I get that sounds crazy, but one thing kept coming back to me was the idea to try and build a portfolio of rental properties in the city. I thought about that for a long time. I really liked the idea because that's what I wanted to do back in the States. The problem in the States was it's so expensive to get even one house, and you've got all the offensive taxes that go along with property ownership in the States, which I am dead against. While there are still taxes you have to pay in the Philippines, it's not the same as it is in the States, and it's not an amount of money that you actually notice going out of the door. The reason I thought about it for such a long time was because my plan was to sell my investments in the States and use these investments in the Philippines. I wanted something that was hands-on that I could get involved with on a daily basis. Not only invested and then I didn't need to do anything. I wanted to do something. It was probably something else that I could have done, but the more I thought about it, the more I kept coming back to the possibility of having this empire, which is the word I'd like to use. But that was perhaps because I was thinking bigger than what I actually had available to me. I spoke to my wife about this on more than one time, and she always thought it was a really good idea. As a foreigner, I was allowed to own a condominium unit in the Philippines, as long as it was within the 40% maximum ownership that are allocated to foreigners. Aside from a condominium, a foreigner isn't allowed to own anything else in the Philippines, most definitely not land and therefore not a house. That was something that really annoyed me, because I felt like if I could have done everything properly in my own name, things may have turned out better. I wasn't about to rush into things though, and first things first, let's just buy one condominium. I didn't really want a condominium, but it felt like it would be the most sensible thing to buy to start with. As I was living in BGC, it seemed to be the best place for us to look for this first condo. We viewed a lot of units. I was mainly interested in smaller units that could be rented out to other foreigners, and there were lots of buildings to choose from, although today there are even more. After looking round for about a month, I settled on one condominium that seemed to offer everything I was looking for. I looked at similar units for rent in the same building and how much they went for. I looked at how occupied the building was in terms of percentage. I looked at similar units for sale. And after all the research I did, it seemed like it was a good price, and we should be able to rent it out and make a return of around 6%. I was getting a bit more than that with my investments in the States, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about feeling that you're doing something and you're involved hands on with your investments, as opposed to it being passive. I've spoken to lots of people about what happened to me, and they all look at me like passive is better, but I didn't agree. I wanted to do something. So I sold $100,000 worth of my investments and purchased that first condo. It didn't take long to find someone to move in. It was a younger foreigner who was also from the States and who was there to change his life, as he put it, and he always paid on time, and I started to feel like it was a good investment. After things went smoothly for 6 months, it only seemed logical to look for another one, and we found one that was equally as good, but I wanted to buy it, and unfortunately the foreign quota had already been filled, and the person selling the unit was from the Philippines, therefore, as a foreigner, I couldn't. I should have thought I'd look for somewhere else, but my wife said, buy it in my name, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I did. That was just under $100,000 as well, and that was rented reasonably quickly, and things seemed to be going well. It wasn't very hands-on in the sense that I needed to go and collect the rent or anything like that, and I still felt, even with these 2 condominiums to manage, I wasn't busy or as busy as I wanted to be. I wanted to do something more in-depth, build my own condominium building, but I knew that was just a pipe dream because there was no way I could have done something like that. But we came to the idea, let's just buy another condominium. This time my wife said, I already have one in my name, why don't I go to the bank and see if we can get a loan for the other one, and then you only need to spend a bit of money, and the rent should cover the loan. We looked at it, and if we paid down 20%, although the interest rates were quite high at around 7% at the time, I thought I would happily try it. It was quite hard for my wife to be approved for a loan as she wasn't working, but we showed that she owned one condo already, she used to work and have a stable income, and the condo was going to be rented out. It was approved, so we bought this other condo, and I actually paid 25% down, and the mortgage for the rest. That went okay as well. It was rented out, although I did find out that the rent wasn't covering the mortgage, and I was out of pocket at just under $100 a month on that one. We sat down and relaxed for a few months, just thinking what the next steps were. I was only interested in Manila, but my wife said, would I be interested in going to look at Leyte, where she was from? I knew nothing about that part of the Philippines. That was actually one of the places I never visited during all my vacations there, and I was happy to go. When we got married, her mother actually came to Manila. That's when I met her for the first time. But we arrived at Leyte and started looking at the possibilities there. Everything seemed to center around her idea of building somewhere to live that could be our base. As a city person, I found it very quiet, but I did see the appeal of spending a few months a year somewhere like that. 6 months in Manila, a month by the beach, and then she must have caught me at my most generous time because after we looked around her area for a while, there was a nice piece of land for sale. The owner owned the house next door, and it was right on the beach. Actually, the beach was in view, but the road was between the house and the beach. And we actually asked how much he was selling it for. He gave us a good price, and I just thought, you know what, why don't we just buy it? I didn't even think about it, or do any due diligence, but it wasn't a lot of money, so we stayed in Leyte a bit longer, and that was put on my wife's name. I wasn't ready to build anything yet, so we went back to Manila, and I was looking for another condo. One came up in Makati, and it looked really good, and I decided that I wanted to buy it in my own name because the foreign ownership was below 40%. That turned out to be my favourite of all the condos so far, and it was getting a return of around 7%, which I thought was great. After we had that for a few months, my wife was starting to talk about the house on Leyte that we wanted to build. It would have just been for us. It wouldn't have been an investment that could have made us any money, but I was going to get older at some point, so it only seemed to make sense that perhaps when I was in my 60s or 70s, not being in a big city would be better for me. And I think that I was thinking long term when I agreed to build it. My wife wanted to be there when it was being built, so we left Manila for a long time, going back every now and then to make sure things were okay. But we were there for a whole year. The house was built, and I was starting to enjoy being there and just going to Manila occasionally. I spent $100,000 on that house, which in hindsight was way too much. I could have had something that would have been good for half the price. But it was amazing to be able to have a bedroom overlooking the ocean, yet no tourists in sight. During that year, when the house was being built, we did invest about $80,000 into other plots of land, which were there for the future. With all the investments in the States, I probably had half of them remaining. It was always my intention to leave at least $250,000 invested in the States, so we still had $250,000 left for anything else that came up in the Philippines. We invested that into 2 more condos in Manila. These were both put into my wife's name. Not that it was necessary to put them in her name, but it just seemed to be like the best idea at the time. Now she owned 3 condos outright and 1 with a loan, and I owned 2 condos outright. She owns the house and all the land. The income we were bringing in for the rent was more than enough for us to have the life we'd wanted. And the $250,000 emergency was even extra income that I had. I never expected that I would have loved living in Leyte, but I really did. I never expected that I would have wanted to have been there more than Manila, but I was happy where we were. We were going to Manila every 2 months, I would say, so there was always something to do. Usually one of our condos would have been between tenants, so we always had somewhere to stay in Manila. That meant we didn't need to pay for a hotel. And I think that life is just progressing as I expected it to. Perhaps I enjoyed being in Leyte because it allowed me to do other things to keep me occupied, things that weren't available in a big city. I bought a small boat and sailed about, only close to shore and to do some fishing every now and then, but I found it a new part of my life, and I enjoyed without thinking about business and other thoughts that I wasn't having anymore. My wife, on the other hand, was still interested in doing things. She was a lot younger than me, but I tried to convince her that we didn't really need to do anything. If you want to do something, we'll do something close by to where we live, and don't worry if it doesn't make money because we don't need it to. I gave her $10,000 to try to open a business close by. She tried something, it didn't work, so I wrote off the money. It wasn't the end of the world, and at least she tried. But that failure never made her want to give up. She wanted to continue, and she just said she's happy to do it by herself, if I'm happy to let her. And I just said that's okay with me. As long as you don't ask for more money, we've got the income coming in, and that's good to pay for everything. If you don't need to use anything else, I'm happy with it. That was the first time I stayed in Leyte by myself as she went to Manila. She said she was going to investigate something for a few days, and she'd be back, and she did come back. I didn't know what she was investigating. I just left it up to her. I was over the idea of doing anything. I was happy with what we had, but she was still of that age where she wanted to do things and achieve things, so I was happy for her to go and try. She said she'd found something to do, investing in a business with one of her friends. Her friend already had a business, which was a gas station, not in central Manila, but quite close by, and said that they were going to be opening another one soon together. I asked her how she was going to do that, and she just said she'd already worked everything out. I was happy for her that she'd found something to do. It was going to involve her spending more time in Manila, so I did go with her and just let her get involved. I'm just in the hotel one day. At this point, all our condos are occupied, and she arrives back and says, "Do I want to go and look at the gas station?" It sounded okay, so we left the hotel and got a taxi, and an hour later, that's where we are, as is her friend. I asked her, "What are you doing with the gas station? How did you invest in it? What's your part in it?" Then she said, "Oh, I used our condos as collateral for a loan, and now I own 40% of this gas station." I never thought she would have done that. I asked how much she borrowed, and she said $200,000. But she had all the paperwork to show that she was an owner of this gas station, and I just said, "I hope it works." I don't know what happened exactly, and I suppose it doesn't really matter, but it didn't work. She said it was something to do with some legal issues, something to do with another gas station that was close by, something along those lines. But that happened after her only being involved with it for less than 6 months. When you were there, it didn't appear that there were any issues, and I was starting to think, is this friend of hers actually a friend, or did they just take advantage of the fact that she had some money? But because of that, the realization that I needed to be a lot more careful with everything that I had. And I needed to be more mindful of the things that my wife would do because she just lost $200,000. Now, all the condos she owned had loans against them, and the income from those three weren't enough to pay the loans. It was close to being enough when they were rented out, but if one or two or all of them weren't rented out, that would be a big payment every month, which would wipe out all the other income. And that was really a big down point of my time in the Philippines and my relationship. I wasn't able to look at her in the same way anymore because she did that. I thought it was incredibly stupid. The thing is, I never would have thought she would have used the condos as collateral. If I'd have known she would have done that, I would have told her you're not allowed to. So we had a choice. Do we get rid of these condos that she had the loans against and get back and see if we can pull things together? Or do we keep them and hope that it's not going to cost us too much money? And then, when the loans are eventually paid off, she'll have them. But looking at the terms of the loans and thinking that I'm probably going to be long gone by the time they're paid off, there's no point really struggling for that fact, so we sold them. Altogether, I put in $325,000. And when they were sold, after all the fees, I got back about $5,000. I'd lost $320,000 because of what she did. Also, the house we had together and the land. I didn't look at her like she was my beautiful wife anymore. The thing that sealed the deal for me was when she kept saying, well, I want to try to do something else. I still had 2 condos in my name, which were both paid for, but there was no way I was going to risk anything else. She just didn't seem to understand the fact that there was no money available for her to try to do anything else, because if it didn't work, that would mean that we didn't have any income anymore. So when we made it back to Leyte, I found that we're not spending time together anymore, and she's trying to do something with no money, not understanding that making an extra $100 a month working every single day is not worth it when you've already got a couple of $1,000 coming in for not doing anything. The reason I hung on for longer was because I was the same way when I just arrived in the Philippines. The thought of not doing anything made me feel nervous and bored. It had taken finding Leyte and moving there and living such a different existence that made me understand that I didn't need to do anything and I could fill my time with hobbies as opposed to business. I did understand where she was coming from because that used to be me, but I wasn't prepared to invest more money, and because of that, the relationship got worse. She left for Manila by herself, saying she was going to look at another opportunity, but I didn't know where she was going to get any money from to invest. She just said she needed to go and look at it because that's what she thought would be the best thing for her to do. When she came back a week or so later, that was when I think I understood that our relationship was probably going to come to an end. She sat down and asked me to come and sit next to her, and she said that she wants to do more business, and if I'm not able to help her, then she doesn't think we can stay together. I couldn't believe it when she said that, because everything that we had done together, it did seem like she'd already made up her mind though, and I just had to ask her what about the house. Then she said, well, we have to share everything. I have the house, you have the condos. As much as I was devastated, I felt like there was no point fighting it because what she had done was insane. If she continued to try to do things, then it would just get worse. One of the big problems was that I don't think she understood that she wouldn't be able to do something because there was no money available her to do anything with. I think because she had feelings that she had when we were doing things in terms of business that she was addicted to it, and that's all she thought about, and I had to agree with her. I didn't even want to leave the house because I was so happy there. I asked her, can I just live here and you can go to Manila? She just said no. My family will come and live here. Not to mention all the land that we bought around there as well. That would have been a huge loss for me. Then I said to her, how about we stay together, we sell the land and you can use that for a business, and I will sell one of the condos and we put it together after the land sells. Thinking that maybe she'd see sense and agree to sell the land and I'll get my hands back on that money. She actually said, okay, let's go to Manila and sell the condo. I said as soon as the land sells, then we can sell a condo. So she agreed to wait for another 3 months just to see what would happen. But nobody bought any of the land. And then she said, let's sell the condo first, and I just said no chance. That was when the relationship completely broke down, and I had to leave and go back to Manila. Back in BGC, in the same hotel I stayed at when I first arrived for my early retirement, I couldn't believe how far I'd fallen. All I could tell myself to make myself feel a little bit better was at least you've got some money left, and at least you got enough money to live and still continue retirement. That was true, but I didn't want to be in Manila anymore because it reminded me of all the times I had with her. No matter how much I loved it, I didn't love it as much after I found Leyte. I knew I couldn't go to Leyte if I was single, and I decided to go to Angeles City, which was a place I visited about 10 years before. I don't know if it was because it was so close to Manila and so easy to get there. I just wanted to go somewhere as quickly as I could. But as soon as I did and I decided that's where I would go, I thought I might as well stay. I'd never been to Angeles City with my wife, so I thought that it would be a separation. I'd also never really been the sort of person who liked that sort of entertainment, but I knew there was no way I would ever get into another relationship, at least a serious one. Also, Angeles City was a lot more affordable than Manila, and my money went further there, and therefore it didn't feel like I lost as much. I'm still living there today. The only thing that I did that I didn't say I would do is get into another serious relationship. I did, and I'm still in that relationship. Yet she doesn't know anything about any of my finances. She doesn't know I have $250,000 invested in the States. I am happy to report that I've actually got $340,000 invested in the States because my investments went up since then. Down, up, so I'm happy about that. She doesn't know I have those 2 condos in Manila, but they are rented out, not all the time, but more often than not, so that adds to the income. I would say I average on a good month just under $2,500. I'm more than happy with that, but I would have been even happy with double, which is what I would have been on if I didn't make the mistakes I did. If I'd left all my investments back in the States, it would be worth close to $1.5 million now, maybe even a bit more, and that would have given me over $6,000 a month. But I don't think you can look back at things and wonder too hard what would have been if I did things differently. I've seen so many people since I've been living in Angeles City come here with all the best intentions in the world, fall in love with a girl, get married, invest into something, and they're the ones who have to return home with nothing left. The fact that I still have enough to live on and live a good life, that's got to be good enough for me. Lastly, my new partner, who I've been with for quite a long time now, was 34 when we met, and I completely overlooked the fact that she had kids. Because she was at a different stage in her life, she wasn't always wanting to do things, and that made our relationship easier. I do support her kids because that's what's expected of me, but it's not making me have to change the way I live. It's not an amount of money that affects my lifestyle, and it's something that I just have to do if I want to be in this relationship. The Philippines was the country that I always went to on vacation, and the country I always wanted to retire to. It was a country I wanted to build an empire in, and I thought I was starting that with my first wife. I quickly realized that even in the Philippines, an empire with $1 million isn't going to happen, and I was happy to be living by the beach in Leyte, just enjoying life. But my wife decided that wasn't enough for her, and she wanted to continue to do things. She lost all the money, our relationship turned sour, and therefore I lost a lot of money because of it. Even after all that happened, I would probably say I wouldn't change anything. I do know now that my wife, she is still my wife, we're still married on paper. She has tried to do other things. The house, as far as I'm aware, is in a state of disrepair because it hasn't been maintained. Yet she would have been in a lot better position if she'd just done what I advised, but she didn't, and therefore she's not. I do feel fortunate to be living in the Philippines, but it does come with struggles and challenges that you're not used to facing. I would never have guessed that my wife would have used those 2 condos as collateral to do something, but that's what happened. That's what caused me to lose my money, and it's what caused my relationship to break down. Don't look at the price of things in the Philippines and think you can carve an empire out because you've got $1 million. It might be a poorer country than the States, but it's not that poor. It's a wonderful country though, and I'm going to be here forever. Just make better decisions if you want to do the same.